Romans readers, chapter 13. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. We need to take a second and look at Paul's complex relationship with the government. Sometimes groups like to use a verse like this, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, when things are lined up the way they feel they should be lined up, when maybe conservatives are in control of things or Democrats are all in control of things. Then they feel like, okay, let's just say conservatives are all in control of things. Then they feel they could pull this verse out and say everyone else should too be subject to the governing authorities because now currently things are running as they're supposed to run. But if they don't run like that, if imagine the most liberal Democrat you could possibly imagine is running things, well, no, I'm not going to be subject because this is not how things should be. Paul says then, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. We need to pause and realize what's going on here. What sort of government was Paul subjecting himself to? Paul was subjecting himself as a Jew to a government that he could not possibly have agreed with. Caesar proclaimed himself as God and said that he was a savior bringing peace throughout the nation. Caesar and those who advocated his rule, they are the ones that also said the word euangelion, the good news. The good news in Rome, the good news that people pushed out and the propaganda, the good news was that Caesar was a god, bringing salvation and peace. Paul took that back in chapter 1 and said, no, you're wrong. Jesus is king. Jesus is king. He's the one who brings salvation. So Paul took that back. But yet what he didn't do was then said, well, now what we need to do is rebel. We need to rebel against Caesar. We need to take arms against, because he is not a king. Paul said, no, we're not doing that. We are going to continue to be subject to the governing authorities. He also must have had in mind Jesus. Jesus subjected himself to Pilate. Now, if anybody could have said, Jesus could have said, well, I will not tolerate this. Pilate is wrong. He's not of God. I will resist Pilate. Paul could have said the same thing. Caesar is wrong. Caesar is not of God. I will resist Pilate. Be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. We sometimes read verses like this and we gloss over them. You need to realize how extremely un-American this is. Paul does not fit at all upon our spectrum of Republicans and Democrats and fighting against each other, of Republicans are right and Democrats must be kept out of power. Paul doesn't fit with it. Imagine Paul was the most evangelical, conservative Republican you could possibly imagine. He's saying, well, let's also imagine that the most liberal, progressive Democrat is in authority. Paul would look at you and go, be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. Because what did he have in mind? Jesus subjected himself to Pilate. Paul, subjected himself to Caesar. And those that exist have been instituted by God. Why? Why on earth would Paul say this? Paul says submission, since we trust our King. There is no king but Jesus, and we will trust that he is actually in control, even when things aren't working out the way we think they ought to. Now, don't be mistaken. Paul's not saying you shouldn't have political opinion. You can have all the political opinions you want. What Paul is saying is, would Paul, as a young American, have rebelled against the British Empire? Would Paul, as the North and South couldn't agree, have broken off, started war? Be subject to the governing authorities. Why? Paul's saying we don't need to do this. We don't need to act violently against people. We don't need to take arms. We don't need to do that because our king is Jesus and we actually believe he's in control. And the king, if he is replanting Eden, does not want anarchy, violence, war, bloodshed in his garden. Now, that's not to say sometimes that wars aren't necessary or wars don't need to happen. but it is not the first choice. The first choice cannot be, I will fight, I will war, I will shoot, I will win, because Jesus just didn't do that. Neither did Paul. It's not to say, though, that sometimes it doesn't have to happen. Sometimes it has to happen, right? Sometimes he does not, the government, the one who is in authority, does not bear the sword in vain. Sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes war and fighting has to happen. It is not, though, our first choice. It's not our first operating principle, which is why Paul then, the very next section, start talking about love. Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves has fulfilled the law. Not said, I will fight and I will do violence. I will take arms for my king. Paul says, no, if you would follow this king, if you would be obedient to this king, you would love each other. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Notice also, Paul still has the law in his mind. He says, I will be a good, obedient Jew, trusting my king. And the way we do that is to love, 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 over and over and over. You shall not commit adultery, shall not murder, shall not steal, shall not covet. Love, love, love. And if you're going to love and owe no one anything, do no wrong to a neighbor, well, then how are you going to have to interact with your government? You're probably going to be somewhat obedient and somewhat respectful, even in a government system that you may not agree with. Paul then further supports this by bringing out these concepts of time. The time, the hour, waking, near, gone, is at hand, daytime. What he's saying is the time when Jesus begins his full and manifested reign is growing short. It's happening soon. So you know what? We can do this. We can do what we're asked. We can be patient. We can submit ourselves. We can love. We can live in a government system even though we don't always agree with it. You know, if I'm a Democrat, I can exist with Republicans. I don't need to fight against them. If I'm a Republican, I can exist with Democrats. I don't need to fight them, because my first thing is to believe that my king's in control. Therefore, I will love and do no wrong to a neighbor, because I know the time is short. Time, the hours come for you to wake from your sleep. Salvation is nearer now than we first believed. Time is short. Jesus is going to come, and he will rule, and he will rule rightly. So, you know what? I can wait it out. There's things I may not like, but I can wait it out. I'm okay with this. I trust Jesus has things in control, even if I don't sometimes like the way things are happening. I will trust my King. Chapter 14 tomorrow.